And hypothetically, we're live if YouTube... There we go. Now it decides that we're live. Welcome to all of the joys of technical problems with this channel. Yes, chat, you are, of course, correct. And as far as I can tell, I should be nice and loud again. And I think the guest will be at vaguely the same audio level as me. I'm sure you will all complain about that ridiculously, because it's what you guys do. So we'll probably play audio games in a minute here. But in the meantime, I have here with me Rick Story. Story, I assume I'm in the general vicinity of correct pronunciation there.
Yeah, that's right. Story, like building height. I'm pretty sure you use that in the US as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
First story,
multi-story building.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
So, forgive me, I've been a ridiculously busy person and then foolishly took time off because you're never allowed to do that. And so I didn't get horrendously deep into your content. I only have a little bit of description here. By all means, go ahead and let people know who you are and what you do.
So I write, well, I'm actually a fellow for Mises UK. I'm sure some of your libertarian audience would be interested in that. But my whole deal is around my book, The Uniqueness of Western Law, in which I explore what actually is libertarianism, because fundamentally I see libertarianism as being a very pre-modern thing. And I see that modern definitions of libertarianism are built on modern concepts of man and this kind of thing. And so in the book, I try to look at, well, where did libertarian law come from? This is, Western law, the rule of law, where the law is the king of kings. It's not something just determined by fiat, but from some, Oriental despot or Sun King or something like that, as was going on in the rest of the world.
You've got to be a fan of Scalia then, because his view on this was the law is not a thing that came, someone dreamed up from nowhere, but rather a long history of wisdom and mistakes made and then corrected.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose you could put it that way. In my research, I found that when we talk about law in different civilizational contexts, there are a lot of scholars who would say that really law is something that was only uniquely central to Western civilization. Or in fact, some of them even say law is a Western thing, law as we would understand it as being something that, so a rational experiment where you are discovering certain objective truths about the way societies function and how the natural order in society is achieved and maintained. And this is something that, principally started with, well, you could say the Greeks, but it was really something that was going on across Europe.
The Greeks just got all the credit for it.
Well, they kind of did. I mean, how often do you think about Icelandic sagas, for instance?
Never.
I mean, in those things. Well, exactly. You're not reading that to your child. I mean, if you are, quite well read, maybe you'll read something like the Iliad with your children. Maybe. But Icelandic sagas, and it's kind of interesting because the heroes in those stories, in Viking sagas and that kind of thing, are lawyers. When was the last time, outside of a really crappy John Grisham novel, was a lawyer the hero in a story?
Never, and possibly rightly so.
Well, there we go. Right. And you see, it's interesting. You're saying rightly so. There's some mistrust about the law, and people tend to hate the law because when they think about that, again, they're thinking about modern Western conceptions of the law, which are very different to the flower bed of Western law, libertarian law, because now we simply have modern states who, as was the case in the rest of the world, just dictate things. Law is determined positively. It is positively imposed on people.
Yes.
By the fiat of the state. Yeah. I'm ranting. I hope I'm not losing.
Oh, no, by all means. carry on. But I would suggest that there's a differentiation, and a rather substantial one, between law and lawyers. Um, Laws, in much the way that you're talking about, law of wisdom, law that is developed based on the reality around it, is very, very different, much more important, substantially more pure than the ideas of ideological lunatic lawyers trying to campaign, as often as not for their own paycheck as well as their client in any given situation, right? It is relevant to say that the duty of a lawyer is to give his whoever his client is, the best defense or legal advice that he can. But if that supersedes, and I think at this point it's pretty clear that it does, any realistic understanding of the law, boy, do you have real problems, right? Because this is how you get lawyers who are going around saying things like the case in Oklahoma, like, well, my client shouldn't be subject to the authority of American law because once upon a time there was a treaty that may or may not be in question. And I think once upon a time, if you took this to a judge, not that I think judges were inherently pure or anything, because they too are just lawyers, but if you took this to a judge in a more serious time in the law, the judge would say, shut up and get out. And that's not what we get anymore. Now it's, is there a legal technicality I can wrap this around and give my client a defense, in which we just ignore the entirety of the law. And that's a pretty substantial difference, in my opinion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Actually, on the cover of my book, there are two statues that you used to see together in European architecture a lot more. One is the goddess Justitia, and we're much more familiar with her. She's holding scales and a sword, and she is blind. She is blind. So thankfully she has her sister, Prudencia, Prudentia, prudence, wisdom. This is why we say juris, prudence, the two together.
I'm not so sure we should say that anymore, but it is why we say it.
Well, exactly. When was the last time you saw these two statues together, particularly in the United States?
Oh, it's I don't know that I have. We celebrate blind justice alone.
Yep.
And then we say jurisprudence out loud like that means something. And I don't think it does anymore.
Exactly.
So
who
you
go on,
see
sorry.
Oh, no worries. You see it every now and again. Gorsuch is ruling on the lockdowns is sort of in this vein, right? Like, it is nonsensical to say that you can go to Walmart and 7-Eleven but not to church. This is ridiculous. This is not a thing. Stop trying. And I gotta say, for a guy who has written opinions that I think are ridiculous, I was pretty surprised and went, well, I guess maybe we're headed the right direction now.
Yeah. I mean, again, I completely agree with you. Who is leading Justitia then? This blind justice? Who is leading it? Who is directing it? Is it some kind of objective understanding of prudence? As it would have been in pre-modern times. In pre-modern times, you would have had the church, and again, Christianity, very, very important for continuing the Roman project and Western law. The first systematized law, taking into account all of the customary law. What you were saying before, the trial and error across Europe, and Roman law, and of course, making this into canon law, church law, and allowing throughout Europe just a plurality of systems of law where you have sovereign institutions, universities, guilds, this kind of thing. And that's all gone. That was all removed very violently in modernity. And what we have is, gradually over time, becoming more and more and more individualized in many ways. What do we have left? What do we have left that binds us, where we have some kind of objective definition of things? Well, I mean, we've got Hobbes's Leviathan. That was what it was. That was what it was. Everyone has their own opinion. We're all going off and doing our own thing and are experimenting and all this kind of thing. So we need something to be the middleman for our interactions, all our interactions. And you have to say that for, as much as certain Western countries are perhaps freer in some ways than, what could we say, South American, African, Asian countries. Nevertheless, we have a state that is the middleman for absolutely all of our interactions. And it's a state that only legitimizes those relationships and those institutions which it controls. And it says, this is a legal person. This is a legitimate relationship.
I think
Otherwise,
I think you're seeing the output of two different things there. One was very, very popular in the 20th century, and that is, lacking a better term for this, one day at a time policy, right? The most famous, because it's the most famous thing in human history, if you are in the West, is, of course, Hitler. And so, well, he's remilitarizing the Rhineland. Like, that's not a big deal. And then the next day he's marching troops somewhere. It's, well, he's only marching troops to this one place. And, it's not like he's done anything before that tells us that we should be worried about this, because you have to assess these things. You have to assess everything in a vacuum. And when you apply that to law, you get a lot of what we see, right? Where it doesn't, precedent only matters when a motivated individual wants precedent to matter. And I am, for obvious reasons, most familiar with American law, but the ridiculousness of watching, sometimes in the same hearing, because you can see this a lot in judge confirmations, the first 30 minutes is, tell me what you think about Roe versus Wade and stare decisis.
Yeah.
And then 5 minutes later, 5 minutes later, is, well, we need to overturn Citizens United. Like, whoa, wait a minute. I thought precedent mattered, right? And so this is, I think, the other thing that matters here is one day at a time policy mixed with very politically motivated people. People who are unabashedly so, and at the same time will lie to your face and tell you that they're not, they're just doing this for some existential greater good or something like that. And they have no interest in any of the consistency. It doesn't matter. The only thing that ever matters is accomplishing their goals. And you can see that most ridiculously, I think, with a Justice Ginsburg, not judicial opinion, but an opinion piece that she wrote talking about Roe versus Wade, in which she said, oh, this is terrible law, but it did what I wanted, so it's good. And I went, you can't have both.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is really the crux of the problem. And this is what libertarians also very often, I'd say most libertarians, completely fail to understand. You cannot have a public discourse without rhetoric. It is a lie. This whole the modern system, the Leviathan, and its priesthood of scientists who they don't have any ideology. It's just, as you said, like the one day at a time. We're just experimenting. We're just working with the data here. That is a lie. There is no discourse without rhetoric. It is impossible. We are necessarily enculturated into a language, into all kinds of different things that make up our thoughts. And when we're coming up with a statement, an opinion about something, it is bubbling up from our subconscious, from all the things that have informed who we are. This whole idea of discourse without rhetoric is a big fat lie, and this is why they can pretend. You see, they say, well, we live in a liberal secular society. Okay, we're just going to go with the data here. We're just going with the data. There's no opinion behind any of this. There's no ideology, and people believe this lie. People go along with this lie because, well, what is the alternative? What is the alternative? What, we're going to have some kind of theocracy so that we're all on the same page regarding definitions of justice and things like that.
This is a thing. I may very well have my own entirely personalized definition of justice that I work with,
Yes,
which is to
yes.
say tempered vengeance. And I think that is probably the best description of justice that I know, because the premise of effectively every single thing that we call justice is somebody was wronged, and what they're not doing is killing their neighbor because their neighbor wronged them. They're going to some sort of mediator, some sort of third party, and saying, "Look, he wronged me. Tell me, tell me what it is that is societally acceptable," and that the justice system should be handing down vengeance that is tempered to something that is societally acceptable. And basically, any other situation than that, you end up with justice not doing whatever it is that justice is prescribed to do. And you end up with this, well, social justice, for example, right? Where nobody was wronged, or at least nobody alive was wronged, and it doesn't matter. There needs to be some sort of vengeance anyhow, and there is no temperance of a justice, of vengeance where no one was wronged. Everything is unreasonable. Everything is destructive. Everything is an entirely negative outcome, because no one was initially aggrieved to begin with, and if you are trying to push forward a metric where people who are not, I mean, this should be what standing is about, right? There should be no standing of any variety to get, what's it called? Reparations, right? Because nobody was a slave. 0 people alive today were a slave in the United States or under the British Empire or blah, blah, blah. These people don't exist. And so you can't temper that. It is at the infinity mark to begin with. 0 harm occurred, and there will be some sort of redress. You are already at a point where you can't make that reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, the problem there is that this assumes that culturally, philosophically, everyone is kind of on the same page as that. I mean, the thing is, you do have some cultures where they don't really have a proper system of retributive justice that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe they'll have some restorative justice, but really, I mean, they'll look at various crimes and they'll have a sort of rehabilitative justice.
Sweden,
and I mean,
is pretty big on that.
Yes.
Is it Sweden?
In some ways they are. In some ways they are. I'm thinking of more. There's a tribe, and the name of it has completely escaped me, in Africa, and they are focused very heavily on rehabilitative justice, and it's a very communal ritual that they perform.
The whole city comes together or something like that, and they talk to whoever did the wrong. The name is well beyond me, but I read about this a while ago, and I thought, well, I mean, I guess if it works, but good luck in a city of 1 million people. I mean...
Well, exactly. But then you also have to think about, well, what about your definition of justice that you've given? Is everyone on the same page as that? With that? Perhaps not. This is kind of my deal. Is saying to libertarians, if you do not have a territory of some kind where at least the vast majority of people are on the same page as you regarding a definition of justice, then you can't have libertarianism.
Well, yeah, I think the reason I reference big cities for a reason, right? Because the Dunbar's number is relevant here, regardless of which of the 5 of them you want to go with. But somewhere between 120 and 200 people, give or take. And it doesn't matter which one you're going with. If you have a tribe of 120 people, or even 200, or even 250, so that your circles are very, very overlapping. Even if you individually don't know the guy who wronged you, everyone knows the guy who wronged you. And so even if you're not dealing with your own experience, every single person who comes to you says, well, Bob's a really good guy, and he really didn't mean to, I don't know, take your chicken or whatever, right? He didn't know, it was a mistake, and you go, oh, okay. And you can sort of, as a person, work around that kind of relationship. But once you start getting into cities where there are tens of thousands of people, the likelihood that you or someone knows the person who wronged you goes down very dramatically. And it's not as linear as people would like to think, because I talked about this before, and it's like, well, but Don, people sue their neighbors over crazy stuff all the time. Like, yeah, how many of you actually know your neighbors, right? You know the people you work with, the people you went to high school with, the guys that you play pool with on Friday night. That's it. You're not sitting down with your neighbors and having good, in-depth relationships over the course of years. So they're not included in that number of people that you can reasonably keep track of and trust and know. And once you get beyond serious overlap of Dunbar's number, this becomes a problem, because you can't reasonably get the empathy, I guess, is really how it is. People become depersonalized to you, and it is just a functional limit of human nature. And so if someone, I don't know, steals your car or whatever, which should be pretty clear at this point, but I don't know, they steal your lawnmower because you left it on the sidewalk or something, and they, if it's somebody you're like, oh, hey, man, what the hell, you have my lawnmower? And he says, oh, well, it was just out on the street and I didn't know whose it was, so I just brought it in. And this is a conversation that's had and done and over with in 5 minutes. When it's not somebody it's, why do you have my lawnmower? Give me that thing. I'm calling the police, right? Because you need that interactive capability of the government, ideally, to resolve these sorts of things, because people get heated, right? Now, turns out human beings are not horrendously rational creatures, regardless of what anybody wants to tell you. And they spend a lot of time, you are attacking me and mine, and therefore I need some sort of vengeance. And look, I'm sure that this all works great in caveman times. I'm sure that all of this, when your tribe was at max 200 people, you no longer have to worry about these kinds of things, because, there's an old wise guy, and the old wise guy knows, wise man, not wise guy, he's not a gangster, but the old wise man knows that, maybe
he is a gangster as well.
Maybe he is.
Maybe he is. Sorry, carry on.
Presumably he knows that Tim over there has had problems with stuff, but he's really not a bad guy. He just has light fingers or something, which is the kind of thing that you hear from these people all the time. Oh, he just takes stuff. It's not that big of a deal. And that'll all work itself out. But once you depersonalize these things, that kind of faith goes out the window immediately.
Yeah, quite right. That character did sound a lot like The Godfather, actually, the whole description you just gave.
Kind of.
And you see, that's the thing. I mean, that is what it was. I mean, the reason you have Italian mafia is because the feudal system in the south of Italy remained very strong, and all the more so as France invaded Italy.
Yeah.
And it naturally just outgrew. It stayed. It served a purpose because Italians tended to still live in those small clusters. Italy is a very localist place. The economy, particularly in the center and even more so in the south, is very, very localist. Yeah. But I think the point we're talking about, where we say, okay, at a certain point, tribes are becoming mixed in business affairs and all kinds of different things. I mean, this was the problem that Rome faced. It wasn't the case anymore that there were these little Greek polis, little Greek city states, they call them. It's not really a very good translation of the word, but all these little Greek polis all around the Mediterranean. Plato said the Greeks were sitting like frogs around a pond in the Mediterranean. And the Roman project was to continue this project of Western law that I said, to discover the rational principles which can be applied across the board for all of these communities, which would facilitate trade rather than war, let's say, between the tribes, which would unite the tribes in a sense. And I mean, explicitly this came with all kinds of religious connotations. These are objective definitions for things like justice that we're talking about, and so these are things that are just given to us. They fall into our hands. They're not something that we just make up. They're things that we are discovering in the world. And so the Romans, they kind of wanted to make like their gods, if you like, and their law and their rules the top of the totem, if you like. And so across Europe and beyond, into the Greek world in the East, there would be unity in terms of justice and things like that. And that's so important. I mean, we're talking about in our modern time, we think we can discover everything scientifically. Well, things like justice, love, goodness, beauty, these are qualities. They're things that you cannot measure. The things that you cannot measure scientifically. They're things that we believe. I mean, we act on them all the time. We don't treat other people as though that they are, just a clump of cells, and we're dealing with them in some scientific fashion. You do, you're a sociopath. I mean, maybe you do think that, but that's usually because there's something wrong in your brain. You'd be perfect for politics.
Yes.
It's true. The studies show political offices draw sociopaths. And so did CEO roles as well, actually, interestingly.
Yeah. Positions of power.
Yeah. Well, you can act with impunity, you understand? You're getting away from justice and all this stuff they're trying to push on you, and you can, walk all over people and nobody can do anything about it. That's kind of the definition of the state, really. And so, this is the Roman project. This is what was taken up by Christianity, and Christianity really changed our whole definition of love. So it wasn't just that, these universal ideas, these laws and stuff were just being imposed on us by the Roman Empire. No, this was something, the kingdom of Christ was in our heart. It's something that we wanted to do out of love. So we consider people from another tribe next door to also be Christians, and they are our spiritual family. We're united with them in a certain sense, and we have to be at peace with them. We can't go raiding their ships at sea. That was what came with modernity when there was a split. You see, Protestants then against the Catholics. Oh yeah, we can go and raid some Spanish ships. Why not? They're not us, So this is. So I mean, my point with all of this is I'm saying, is with Christianity came this nice flower bed for what we know and understand as being Western law, certain libertarian ideals, so many of which are taken up in the U.S. Constitution in a very lovely way.
How do I even phrase this? On a human level, I guess, is the way to say this, right? So in an interpersonal but larger kind of level, what you're doing there is you're giving a reason for empathy a priori, right? And so even if you don't know this person, even if you don't know whoever it is that you're dealing with or anything that they have ever done, you know in advance that they are following a certain set of moral codes, that they are of the same general interests as you. And so while that doesn't inherently make you empathetic towards them, it sort of moves the needle to zero, right? You're no longer in a, you're over there and therefore the enemy. You're in a, well, even if I don't know you, I know that we can get along on very basic precepts. And this is the same general premise as things like, we are a nation of laws, not men. Right? So you are as equally subject to law as me. You are as equally required to follow the rules. And so presumably, therefore, I know that you're not cheating me. You're not stealing from me. You're not about to kill me in mere moments, because you too, whether I like the laws or not, are subject to them. And so therefore I know that if you call me for a business meeting, we can go and we can have a disagreement, and you're not going to shoot me at the end of it, right? you know? And
Yep, exactly.
these sorts of basic things are really required to have, again, once you get too far outside of Dunbar's number, to have any sort of societal interaction. So I think in that sense, I am entirely on the same page of why the anarchists of the world are just wrong. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's easy to just throw out a statement like the common good, but that would just make the anarchist libertarians go crazy. Where does that come from? It's about understanding that we just are necessarily enculturated into something. Someone had to look after us when we were a baby and bring us up inside. Where did my language come from? so that had to be given to me by other people. Yeah. It's not something I had a choice in. Okay, but this is it. This is me. This is the way that I have to communicate with you, and there's so much that comes with that. There's so much of the frameworks for all kinds of different concepts in my mind that are informed by that. And my point is, you have to have a sense of what the common good is with other people, and this is why in the pre-modern West, I could have traveled from my hometown in England to Florence in Italy on a ship, and I could have perfect confidence that once I arrived there, the guy would have all the same notions of morality as I did. And if I had to go to a private court as a merchant and expect some justice, the decisions would be pretty much identical to what I got in England. And that is actually what happened. And that was all done completely privately. It didn't have any state interference, not until later. Yeah. So how could that have happened? Purely because, culturally speaking, everyone was on the same page. We were singing literally from the same hymn sheet. And so that was viable. That was viable. If I was traveling to a Muslim country, there would be a certain element of unpredictability about that.
I think you would be much closer to accurate in saying that there would be a small amount of overlap. But yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, there would have been some. I mean, I could probably guess that there would be more overlap than, say, if I was traveling to China.
Yeah.
Or Japan. Or going to visit a Mongolian tribe. It would have just blown my mind like Marco Polo. It would have been a struggle to get along, and I would have had to have been learning all kinds of stuff. You understand? It would have been completely unpredictable.
So definitively, right? Having been out of the West ever, it's very different, and in ways that are not necessarily immediately obvious, because other people's view of courtesy is not what ours is, right? Insofar, if you saw someone who was doing something discourteous in Western nations, and you had some sort of, cultural courage might be the best way to describe it. Somebody, and this happened when I was a kid, someone would come by and go, you're not supposed to do that, right? And, okay, maybe they're not making a big scene, but around the rest of the world, they'll just leave you to be impolite, per se, and then tell everyone to hate you because that's how they do things. And so you don't, it is really a struggle to get along in a lot of other cultures, because no one is really, most of the time, willing to come down and tell you what you're doing wrong. I mean, this was the whole premise of tour guides in a generation gone past before we decided that, people everywhere are just people and everybody agrees on everything, which it turns out almost nobody agrees on anything. So
Exactly. And sadly, I mean, okay, this is where we are in the West now. Now we are so detached from an objective sense of the common good and a cultural framework for all of society. We become so modern. We become so detached from real organic relationships with each other. Like you were saying, we don't know our neighbors. We're so detached. We're so detached from the natural world and where our food comes from. We're completely detached from institutions which are outside of the state. That they have some like actual authority in public life.
yeah.
And it's where men gather together and we do stuff in our community together. We're completely detached from all of that. And so this is why you can end up in a situation where liberals, the average liberal, his thoughts are just dictated from day to day by CNN or whatever. Yeah, and a lot of guys on the right are like this as well.
The right is not immune. It is just a bigger problem over there.
No. Yeah. And so people can just have very manipulable. I mean, they think they're totally individual and they find themselves and they're on their own little journey in life and stuff, and they think they're so special. Oh, look, the color of my hair is really unique. I dyed it
the same color as everybody else.
And and nobody else has the same gender as me. Mine is I have my own special gender, and you see, like that, you are completely pliable. You are the corporate entities can completely control your whole media experience in life. Everything you're going to see in the news, every single thing, and your outlook, your whole worldview can be completely distorted, and you will not be able to understand this. And that most 80% of people do not have the reflective capacity to then see outside of this. And so you just end up as a tool. So this is why we were talking about this off the air. This is why liberals now, typical lefty liberal in your country, Democrat voter, awful. They just terrible. They can be so used by neoliberal corporate elites to totally go along with their whole ideology and the lockdown and all of these different things, so that where are we actually headed? We're headed towards technocratic feudalism. That's quite clearly where we're headed. Look at all of the middle class, all of the wealth of the middle class is being siphoned at an extraordinary, historically unprecedented rate into the most technologically powerful corporate bodies that have ever existed, and this is supposed to be the left, and they're recreating the monster that they are supposed to despise. This is how completely detached people are.
I think my one criticism of this is maybe just a reframing and not a real criticism, which is to say that the people who are out there dyeing their hair the shade of pink that you can get from, I don't know, who makes hair dye? Some corporate entity that makes hair dye. Insert
L'Oreal?
Sure. If you are going down to the store and you are picking up a package that says L'Oreal on the front, and you are dyeing your hair, I have news for you. There are tens of thousands of people, at bare minimum, that are dyeing their hair that color. And I know that because they wouldn't be selling the product if there weren't, right? And so what you end up with is even the radical individualists of the world, these people of Well, there are an infinite number of genders, and so therefore each of us has our own gender. You are acculturating into an idea where everybody picks up their own gender, and so you are picking up the group mentality of there being infinite numbers of genders, and to buy into this, you have to accept these things. And it is simply impossible to get away from the reality that is, without tens of thousands to tens of millions of people saying there are infinite genders, you probably wouldn't be out there with astral unicorn gender, because no one would have told you that, and you probably didn't think it up on your own. Now, you may have added your own personalized dose of creativity to whatever it is that the general culture around you is boiling on or simmering in or whatever it is. But you're a part of that. You're portions of this giant group. And in the world of the technocracy that is coming, and it is, this is one of the things where I get, well, pull out your tinfoil hat. The people who are doing this, and they are doing it, there is an active effort to make this happen, are the most collectivist group of people who have ever existed on Earth. And this is how I get to... we are effectively still dealing with the communists of the 20th century. Have they changed gears a little bit? Yeah. Are they going about things a slightly different way? Yeah. Are they using a lot of the same rhetoric as the communists of the 20th century? Yes. It is incredible to me how much capitalist encirclement still guides the left, right? Which is a thing that, I mean, this was Stalin's life, was capitalist encirclement. And the groups of people who are making the push for this, the United Nations are pretty overt about their view that we should have a technocracy. You should not have a family or a house or a car or anything that Western civilization would understand. Is a group that was set up by FDR's wife, Churchill under a socialist parliament that told him he was going to get in it whether he liked it or not, and Joseph Stalin. These people were overt leftists of the 20th century progressivism style. They liked Hitler right up until Hitler was killing them. And if you go back and you listen to these people, when they're talking about Hitler in the 30s, before he's waging war, they're talking about how great it is to have this strong man who will be making the decisions to guide Europe, to anchor Europe in reality and ensure that things are taken care of. And it's the same mentality. There's a reason they still like planned economies. There's a reason that they don't think your privacy is a good thing. You're not allowed to be a person that they would otherwise dislike, even if what is determining whether or not they dislike you is somebody else, right? It is collectivization through individualism, which is circuitous and probably doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense, but it is what they do. You can each be individually strong and do whatever you want, as long as you're doing it my way.
Yeah, absolutely. So important what you said about the fact that our identities are manufactured now. They're not things that grow out of organic relationships, which they hate because they cannot control them, like family. Family is the final bulwark against all of this, and it is what they are. They ceaselessly attack in everything, every show, it's all the time, non-stop, because that's all that is left of the old world, realistically.
Often.
So,
yes. Often, that's all that's left.
yeah, absolutely. And yes, I mean, so from family, you get a sense of who you are through real relationship. What am I talking about? I'm talking about when people genuinely care about you, and they will help you. They will give things to you, not because it's a market interaction or anything like that, but just because they love you. So they'll gift to you unconditionally, and they will care for you, even if they know that you can't return anything. That sort of thing. The sort of institutions in society, the kind of what I was talking about before. I gave a couple of examples: universities, guilds. Really, it would have been right the way through society. That would have given you a real sense of who you are, your place in the world. It would have given you an identity that was real, and it was born out of loving relationships, not things that are just purely manufactured and legitimated by the state. And it is so sad when people are buying their identity from the store, and when they somehow think that they are some lefty hero, and they're fighting the man, and they're going to reach some sort of utopian common good. They've got no idea. They have absolutely no idea.
I think best embodied by I'm an individualistic lefty who hates the man. Look at my iPhone.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. And so, I mean, this is how blind. This is how blind. I don't want to say they. I mean, this is how blind we have become as a society. I think across the West, this is where we're at. And I absolutely agree with you about what can we say? To use a biblical term, the spiritual wickedness in high places. This, the cabal of elites around the world who would use capitalism or communism or whatever modern ideology they can in order to bring us to the place where we are all just as mindless and controlled as Antifa or Black Lives Matter. These are no less manufactured identities.
Oh, they definitely are.
Exactly.
I should not get caught in a rabbit hole. The history of those in particular Antifa is very interesting to me because it is quite literally Soviet reach across the globe, insofar as Lenin was subsidizing these things. But there's a thing I say around here that kind of just pisses people off, and so I'm going to keep saying it, which is to say that Andrew Breitbart was wrong. Politics is not downstream from culture. Culture is downstream from politics, and the hammer and anvil of politics is the law. And that might sound cynical, and that's because it is, but it's much more an observation of reality than it is my wish, right? I certainly don't want a situation where we outlaw what I think even a generation ago would have commonly agreed was goodness, but that is where we are. And so what you end up with is, things like the Affordable Care Act was the most unpopular bill ever passed in the United States. Since metrics have been kept, the most unpopular bill. And it passed in 2009, something like that. And by 2018, it was more popular than unpopular. And now it seems to have in the vicinity of 2/3 to 3/4 popular support. That is the law coming down and forcibly changing what the culture is. Because if you go back to the 60s, I want to say, there's a video of somebody saying, oh, we need socialized medicine in this country. It's a good thing. And his opponent said, Americans will never accept socialized medicine. We are not socialists. We know better than this. Anything even pushing us towards socialized medicine is this ridiculous thing. We are strong and independent people. And it turns out that that's only true until you force it down the throat of the populace, and then they come out less than a decade later and say, oh, this thing is great and it's saving my life. And so if the culture changed the politics, we wouldn't have an Affordable Care Act. We just wouldn't. Obama would have been impeached over doing this, and that was not going to happen.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree with you. I mean, I think it's Personally, I think it's important not to make a false dichotomy about these things. In the later Middle Ages, they started making a false dichotomy. Which comes first, reason or will? And that just caused all kinds of problems. It's like, well, the two go together. You don't need to turn this into a dichotomy. Culture and politics, I think they can tend to go together. What we've seen now is that the same forces which, thanks to Donald Trump being in the White House, now this is just part of the mainstream public discourse. We can talk about the deep state, and we can talk about the globalist forces that control the deep state. This is all just normal, everyday talk for Donald Trump now. So, I mean, this is normal discussion. This is not tinfoil hat stuff. Not anymore. And with Jeffrey Epstein, we can further talk about how a lot of these guys are satanic pedophiles. But anyway, that's a different topic.
And yet accurate.
well, exactly. There we are. And see, that can be part of the normal discourse now. When we think about the level of control that these global forces have over governments of the world, and the levels of monopoly that they exercise in terms of the corporations, so that the very few number of mother companies that control really all of the news channels, not just in the US, we're talking across the world.
Oh yeah.
they control the stories that we hear. And again, I keep coming back to this, but it's just so important that they're effectively controlling the shared mythos we have. They are controlling the public discourse and the narrative and the thoughts that people are just enculturated into, the things that the vast majority of people just can't think outside of. And so these are the stories they hear. This is what they think within. And so, yeah, in a certain sense, culture is downstream of politics. And to me right now, because the forces that control both of them are the same, they are just in a dance. They're in a kind of dance with each other.
Well, this is, as I'm sure my wife would tell you, as she tells basically everyone else who ever talks about the subject, watching TV with me is probably not good for your blood pressure, realistically. And I that might be a generous way to put it, because I don't watch enough TV to be engaged in this in the way that people who get off work turn on the TV and then they just stay there for 6 hours. And then on Saturday, they're watching 8 hours of television, or 10 or 12, right? I don't have enough time for that. That's not a reasonable thing for me to even try to do. But two, watching television is infuriating. I mean, you sit and you listen to overt lies told over and over again under the pretense that maybe somebody will get along with them. My argument with it not being a false dichotomy is that we have been dealing with a lot of that for generations. I mean, TV was, at least in the United States, pretty prolific by 1960. And so presumably whatever outputs you were going to have would not have happened by 1960. And yet a lot of the legal changes had already begun, right? So the law was already forcing, I hate the term liberalization because it's not very liberal, but this move to the left. It was already compelling this move to the left. And so you see the outputs already, and then every time, even to this day, that the media is out there pushing these ideas, they get pee-pee slapped for it, effectively, right? Look, we're not going to watch your hyper-woke ridiculousness. We won't do it. On the flip side, no one is doing anything about your schools teaching your children to be transgender, blue-haired lunatics. That is just happening, and no one is doing anything about it. And this is the real differential in the law for me, because to get people to buy into this is very difficult. People don't like it. And that's pretty obvious, right? You end up with some people somewhere who are like, oh yeah, great, we're all accepting of, these crazy people. And then the vast majority of society says, yeah, that's not a thing. Right up until they're told you will go to prison if you say this is not a thing. And then they just shut up.
Yeah. And you see, this is why Donald Trump is so hugely important, if I can turn it to him. It's not simply because he is relatively an outsider from the the globalist forces we were talking about before, and so that he's acting as a kind of spanner in the works. I mean, this is why they want to get rid of him, and we want him to stay there for as long as possible. It's not just that, it's that he represents, and he knows that he represents, this cultural framework, like I was talking about before, which exists in America, particularly right across rural America, and, well, just in large swathes across the country, perhaps outside of certain major cities on the west and east coast.
You'd be
where
surprised.
Christianity, well, perhaps I would, but nevertheless, I think that the actual voting numbers that we saw on, when was it? When was voting night?
November 3rd?
That was it, the 3rd of November, yeah. I think that shows that Americans, whom the rest of the world looks at as a group of people who are a large population descended from people with a rebellious spirit, and whose cultural framework upon which they based all of their actions and what they were doing and so many of their ideas that they appreciated in the Constitution was a Christian framework. And so there is this large part of America which has these shared definitions, and which is why they are fed up with the deep state. It's why they're fed up with globalists and their attitudes. It's why they voted for Donald Trump, because Donald Trump represents someone who Donald Trump is the person who would best represent them. He didn't need to be where he is. He's a billionaire. He could have gone off and done whatever he wanted. He made a choice, and he's worked very, very hard to be as much of a representative of those people as he possibly can. I mean, in his mind, he probably just sees it like, oh, weren't things kind of just better before, when people were Christian and they were just like nice neighbors to each other, and it was all just kind of nice, in America before. Whereas these guys, they're all just pedophiles, and they're crazy and they're horrible and want to take jobs away from this country that I actually happen to like. That's just where he's at. But that is enough. That is enough. That is enough to represent the definitions of justice, like what I was talking about before, of the vast majority of American people. And it's shared by people of conservative temperaments. I mean, genuinely, really traditional conservative temperaments across the West. And they love Trump. I'm talking about, whether they're traditional Catholics or whatever. They like Donald Trump because they like that he is prepared to stand up and just fight for that same framework, which automatically makes him a hero.
I think in some ways, and this is probably a generalized criticism of conservative people in my mind, is that in 1991, we were not losing as hard as we are now. And I don't know that is even a debatable point. But for those who want to, go look at policy in 91 and look at it now. and go look at everything in the world that you're worried about right now, and it was probably, at worst, a lesser problem in 1991. And Trump, whatever else may be true about him, is he is effectively the mainstreamed Democratic Party of 91. You did not have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 1991. That person didn't exist in public discourse. And to the point that you can go back and you can see Hillary Clinton talking about, she's not one of those crazy liberals, because shortly before, during the Reagan era, the various socialists and communists and ridiculous leftists of the world that were going to manage every minute of your life were out in force telling you how great this was going to be. And because they were being, let's be honest, open about the objective here, they were very easily destroyed in public discourse. We didn't have the subsequent generation of acculturation into leftist nonsense, and we didn't have, reasonably speaking, the Federal Department of Education unto itself, the creation of this, gave a capability to force down culture on people in a way that didn't exist prior to that. And very quickly after its creation, you start to see this sort of nonsense being applied. Most notoriously, that nobody ever talks about, is Barack Obama wrote an executive order that said, if you punish black children more than white children, the only reason you're doing per capita, the only reason that you're doing that is because you're racist. And that inherently instills critical race theory in every school in the entire country. And that was not a thing that they could, good control of teachers' unions, good control of the colleges, blah, 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 that they have had and been working on since the 60s, that kind of flip a switch and institute critical race theory didn't exist prior to the creation of the Federal Department of Education. And what we get out of it is the past 20 years, which, to bring this back to why it is that people go, well, 90s Democrat is okay, is that I think a lot of people, specifically roughly my age, 30 to, say, 50, look back at the 90s and think, it was kind of quiet back then. I didn't like everything that was going on, but there wasn't open warfare going on in the 90s. And I think that's a little bit of looking back through rose-colored glasses, but certainly compared to today, the open warfare that there was much, much smaller. It was much quieter. It was not Antifa burning down cities, which is, a kind of reasonable criticism of 2020. And so I think to some degree we're sort of just fond of yesteryear, and Trump very much embodies yesteryear.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. He certainly does, and I would also agree with the point that looking back at the 80s, say, it was popular for a while to look back at the 80s and say, oh, weren't things great then? Wasn't that kind of perfect? A little bit of Generation X people. There's this phenomenon where I forget what age it is. There's an age where it's like, is it 10 years old? I cannot remember. It's something like that. And that part of your life is instilled in your mind as what's normal.
Yeah.
So there's probably a little bit of that going on, I imagine. But also, it is just kind of true, especially through the 2010s.
Oh, yeah.
Things have accelerated at such an extraordinary rate. But I would also say, this is why I bang on so much about modernism, because I don't look at and say, oh yeah, World War I, that's where the problems really started. And then there's the other guy like, the French Revolution, that's where the problems really started. And I'm kind of more the latter. You know what I'm saying?
There are really long-form discussions here.
Yeah,
peripherally attached to this channel about these things. Don, you
but
need to tell me your very specific thoughts on the French Revolution. To which my answer is, I don't know that much about the French Revolution. Sorry.
yeah. Well, I mean, well, this is the thing. This is the thing. I mean, people don't, and so it is just a case of, things are kind of better in the 80s. Let's go back to that. But what I will say is, I think for the the Groypers,
Yeah.
the America First guys, Nick Fuentes, all of those guys, they their plan. He says, trust the plan. The plan is basically to kind of, Donald Trump leaves a door open for younger guys who kind of see the bigger picture and directionally where things are going, and kind of how far back we've got to turn things before it just inevitably ends up where we are now anyway. And those guys are saying, well, Donald Trump leaves the door open so that young guys who get this can get into the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is really like the worst enemy. They are enemy number one. I mean, because they're supposed to represent traditional values, and they just never do. They never do. They betray the people all the time, and it's the same with pretty much every right-wing party across the West. It's exactly the same thing. They're just controlled opposition, and so that again is why I think Donald Trump is important. He's the spanner in the works, and while the works are all gummed up, this is a time of opportunity. This is a time of opportunity, potentially in America, to totally change the Republican Party and the whole public discourse that the Republican Party brings to the table. And I mean, is there a better plan out there than that?
No.
I mean, you might not like the America First guys for a number of reasons, but I mean, they're a whole lot wiser than so much of what I see on the right.
I think because as much as I am not inherently familiar with the French Revolution, my major, I guess, field of study these days is Stalin. Because I think Stalin is more relevant to this portion of the 21st century than probably any other human being in all of history. Stalin and Mao certainly are competing for most important, because there is so very much that is directly traceable to those two men. The capitalist encirclement thing is one of them, but relevantly speaking, they both hated nationalism with a fiery passion. That was their argument against Hitler, effectively, because for them it was a global revolution, and that's sort of the problem. And why is this relevant? Because when Stalin kicked out Trotsky effectively created the neoconservative by himself. He wrote a bunch of things marginally because he was mad at Stalin, and so if Stalin said something, whatever Stalin said was wrong, except insofar it agreed with Marxism and therefore was untouchable. And so you get Trotsky writing things about how, well, maybe nationalism isn't that bad, but you still have to have this global perpetuation of things. And then he would, at the same time, because the left is never consistent, go after Stalin for writing socialism in one country, but such as the left. But at the same time that you had them here in the United States, and almost exactly the same time, you had portions of people who were saying, oh, it's okay to have a family, it's okay to love your country, but we also need this global perpetuation of democracy, because that's basically the same time you see it. And if you spend any time watching the global perpetuation of democracy, mostly what it is a global perpetuation of Marxism, right? I mean, and I don't think that's by accident. And so you get the neoconservatives, and here you get a different problem, in my opinion, which is to say that the right has effectively no capability to take over an institution. It's a failing that we should recognize, because we're not good at it, and this idea that we're going to go take institutions back is, unless we absolutely have to, we shouldn't even be trying, right? So if if you're looking at the school system and go, we need to take it back. No, just tear it down to the foundation, get rid of everything, build something new. Understand that the left are going to be coming for that something new, and we may have to do this every 10 years, but be that as it may, that's what we're going to have to do. Because any time that we create something, the left takes it over. And if they can't take it over, they destroy it. And that's how they've been probably forever, but again, in the life of where I spend all of my time reading and researching the past century. That's how they've always done things. And at the same time that you had the right in America adopting these neoconservatives who were much better at taking over institutions, which is why the Republican Party doesn't defend conservative values, you had what amounts to, I think Blair is everybody's focal hate point going on in the UK. But it's really interesting to go back to Churchill because he was the turning point, right? Where conservatives in the UK did conservative things and then very suddenly didn't. And you can see him, there are speeches of his railing against all of this backdoor socialism that is coming into the UK and talking about how it will destroy the country and everything that it has ever meant. And that if we do this, we may as well get rid of the Tory party and only have a Labour Party. And because we're just agreeing to one party rule with one just doing it a little bit slower. And he was very prescient. He knew very much what was on the table, and he lost. That's how you get Boris Johnson coming out, a month ago? I'm not a communist. Well, apparently you are,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, at least his missus is. Well, she's, I think, the one that's influencing a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, he comes out with what is effectively the UK version of the Green New Deal. This about sums up the right in the UK. I have a friend, Sean Gabb, who used to be pretty popular. He used to write for the Telegraph, but he's been kind of sidelined now. He debated Boris Johnson over 10 years ago, I think now, on the future of the Conservatives. And his attitude has always been, if the right gets into power, if it really were the right, if it really were serving the people and the values that it is supposed to, it would absolutely burn down all the institutions created by the left, all of these things, leave no paper trail, nothing so that it could possibly be recreated with any ease at all in the future. Destroy the BBC, all of these things, totally destroy it. And again, bringing it back to Trump a little bit here, but I mean, this is something else that I think people are hopeful for when they're looking at him. That we're hoping that he is so pissed off by everything that's happened that he is just going to go on a rampage. I mean, he's already indicated that he is going to completely replace staff around him if there is a new term for him. I mean, one can only hope that just as Fox News has been totally flushed down the toilet now, outed as the traitors they are, that this would happen right across the Republican Party. This would lead to massive changes across the right, and lead to different relationships with different lobbies. I mean, look at how the Zionist lobby kind of just dumped him, and I mean that is a big part of neocons in the United States is those lobbies, and they've dumped him, and he's clearly not pleased about that. I think he unfollowed Benjamin Netanyahu and a couple of other people on Twitter, which is Trump's way of saying something.
Yeah.
So let's hope that would lead to a completely different relationship with the neocons that you so brilliantly outlined the origins of. So what can I say? I mean, that is the hope in terms of the future of Western law.
So I think it is
very little opportunity. Go on, sorry.
I think that's not how we're going to do it. As much as this runs very counter to something that I talk about a lot, which is there is no knight in shining armor for us. And for for you to be correct, there would have to be one, right? Let's say, hypothetically, and at this point it is very hypothetical, that Trump has a second term, and Trump is going to come in like the bull in the china shop wrecking ball that we all hope him to be. Let's go really big and say that he can take out in its entirety one of these institutions. Rip the FBI to pieces, rip the Federal Department of Education to pieces. And look, I think he did some good groundwork on at least that one in the first term. But the likelihood that he's going to get more than one seems pretty low to me. And so, let's go big and say he gets three. We're still dealing with dozens, hundreds of these things. Things that people don't even know exist. The NLRB does not get talked about by anybody, and it's got to go. There's no way to keep this overtly communist most of the time institution, which, when I say the acronym, nobody knows what it means. It's National Labor Relations Board. And these are the guys that are creating your interrelationship law policy things with your employer, with how you are even allowed to have contracts, etc. And these guys are overtly communist. Go if you Google them, and they are very diffuse, so they're going to be hard to go after. There is a national board, but again, nobody talks about it. It would have to go, and because it is not going to be headline news to get rid of them, I don't think anyone's going to go after them. There's some possibility of the FBI. There's some, or at least targeting of the FBI, the NSA, the CIA. At this point, the CIA may be, the place to go after. But we're not going to be able to depend on this idea that someone is coming to save us. And equally speaking, there is this problem that I think the right has, which is we estimate ourselves to have power here, and I don't think we do. Trump is the president, but it is right to say that he has been impeded every step of the way by the administrative state, the deep state. God forbid you talk about after the left took over Congress, they wouldn't let him do anything. And this is why you got all these executive orders. But executive orders can be undone in the stroke of a pen by the next president. So none of those things are secure. Those are very temporary victories that will not last. It's generally a formality to keep the prior president's executive orders in. Does anyone believe Biden is going to leave his executive orders there? Because he's not. And I know somebody's going to say, oh, Don, but Dak approved. You can't just pull an executive order. Well, I don't think the left is going to stand on that. And certainly with a more constitutional judiciary, they're going to say, well, you're allowed to repeal executive orders. That's how this works. So I think we have to go about this more circuitously, more through the back door, because we're going to need the left to do that thing that we all claim that it does, that it doesn't do, which is to say eat itself, right? The left will destroy things once those things are no longer valuable to it. Oh, Don, but they just got rid of Jeremy Corbyn. Oh, Don, but they just got rid of, pick a person, right? Oh, Don, but they're doing whatever in school systems and whatever. The realities of this is it's like taking a squeezed lemon, leaving it on a counter for 10 years and coming back and throwing it away. They lost nothing. In fact, it's mostly just house cleaning. And you see this with what's her name, the Harry Potter lady. I never remember her name.
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, and so she's been out there promoting all of this leftist ideology, getting people on board. They were effectively treating Harry Potter like the Bible for a while, and then things shifted, and the critical race theory portion, the truly ridiculous transgenderism thing started to take root as the ideology of the left. And the moment she pushed back on that, it was, oh, okay, you're no longer useful, get out. And they were perfectly happy to do it, but they had already gotten years of treating Harry Potter like the Bible out of this woman. They had already gotten the capability to get things done, the ridiculous things that we all watch. On the right, on the other hand, if the left calls us racist, we scream, we cry, we kick whoever that is out. We say, we're good people that way. And I think the lesson of this needs to be that we are not in any way, anywhere powerful enough to openly fight the left in the way that everybody on the right wants to, myself included. Make no mistake, I, lacking a better ideological metaphor, I guess, would love to go put on the armor, mount the horse, pull out the broadsword and say, that's enough of the left. But it's not coming. And us waiting on this as opposed to doing what we can to emulate the left, creating networks of people. And by the way, I spent all my time trying to do this, and the right doesn't like to do it. So it's worse than herding cats. But if we don't start, we're going to lose. Because, and again, this should have been the lesson of like Reagan, who, the more I learn about Reagan, the less I like him, but still was at least economically right-wing, right? But the things that he did were undone in 10 years, right? We're already back to the left chugging along at the rate that it wants by the middle of the Clinton administration, and so we need to start fighting this like guerrilla warfare, and that's not the right's purview. It's not its thing. I don't really like it. But if you can get, I don't know. So I propose this law all the time, and nobody on the right likes it, is any institution that is determined, legally speaking, to be racist can no longer have federal funding. If you pass that into law, it would be the end of nearly every leftist institution. Probably be the end of every right-wing institution that lives entirely off federal funding, but it turns out the right doesn't get much federal funding. The left gets tons of it. And so, yeah, we would lose some in that kind of fight, but the left would actually start eating itself. If Harvard suddenly is taking on 50 lawsuits a month, in which they're required to put up money so that somebody can sue them, because that's a relevant part of this, right? They're required to pay at least initial retainer things, even at 50 grand, right? And the flip side of that is they lose federal funding. Well, Harvard's not going away tomorrow, but you will have the piranhas in the water, right? They will be taking off little pieces every year, and there's a big chunk if they lose any of them. And that would not involve anybody on the right at all, because let's face it, if I went down to Harvard and I said, well, you're discriminating against me because I'm white, the courts would say, and who cares? Shut up and get out. You're a privileged white male. But if you leave this as open and available law, you'll get ambulance chaser attorneys who go down to the black kid that failed a class and says, well, the only reason you failed that class is because the teacher's racist. And we know that because of Barack Obama's executive order that says the only reason you're punishing black children and white children differently is because you're racist. So let's go sue them, because by this definition, the school is racist. Now they lose, and ideally, no federal subsidization of student loans anymore, and you effectively shut off the spigot of money to Harvard, who, don't get me wrong, can soak that for probably a decade, but they can't soak that and the lawsuits and maintain the power that they have and keep pushing leftist agenda. And, they can't do all of the things anymore. And all the right had to do to get this done is go, yeah, take your leftist ideology and make it so that this affects you in the way that you want it to affect me. And then, it will be leftist lawyers are busy. There are lots and lots of constrained supply things that come into effect here, and the left can't do literally everything. I know we watch them and it seems like they do everything, but they do everything because we pay them to do everything. And the law I'm suggesting here, which I'm sure I could flesh out over the course of like hours, but these are the general premises, is not something the right's going to do, because it sounds like leftist nonsense, but it would destroy the left in probably a decade all by itself, right? It would be such a blow to them that we might, at that point, be able to pull out a guy in shining armor to mount a horse and say enough of the left. But we won't do it because we're looking for that guy to come before we've made a battleground for him to be on.
Yeah, it reminds me of something a friend of mine, Charles Coulon, who is a great American patriot and an interesting Catholic writer. He said, give them what they want, give it to them good and hard, by which he means, let them have their policies, let them have it right up and close, right where it hurts. I think you make a good point there. Of course, I mean. There are other avenues. Rudy Giuliani has suggested that there be another agency introduced having, full, federal authority, which would rout out, unconstitutional thinkers from agencies across the country, with the justification, of course, that there have been tremendous national security breaches going on in the election, and all of that is still ongoing in the US. I mean, I think what this is pointing to is that there is no one shining knight to come and save us. Indeed, I mean, the story of the West, the reason the West was able to form the kind of law that I was talking about before was because there was greater competition among strong men in the society. The reason kings in Europe were so different to the rest of the world was because they were kind of a bit psychopathic, and so they wanted kudos from peers, people they actually respected. So they didn't just kill off competition. They wanted these other guys around to garner respect from them. And so this led to, sort of aristocracies, sort of libertarian aristocracies. And that heavily informs our views of politics, even to this day in the West. And so, what we're talking about here is men, strong men, responsible men who understand the importance of duties and responsibilities, not just in your neighborhood, but, reaching outside of that as well, across the nation. This is important. The principles of subsidiarity in politics, which very much inform the American Constitution, where you say, responsibility, decision-making, political decision-making has to be local to, the people it affects, as close to, the head of a family or even the individual as possible. We kind of need to get back to that. So, yeah, I think... you've introduced an interesting side of the coin there that, okay, I mean, maybe, let the left have what they want, see how destructive that's going to be for them. On the other hand, if there are opportunities for networks of men across the United States to actually finally have some platform somewhere culturally or politically, so that they can affect some change, so that they can actually be influential in some sense, let them have it and let them go for it. And what I would say is, I think there already are the networks for something like that to be sustainable across the United States. And I think it exists in traditional churches. I think it still exists in Christianity, and I'm talking traditional Christianity. Not only was that really the flower bed for what we would identify as uniquely Western law, I think for the past 2,000 years, it is what has really kept the state at bay from overturning that. And I think it's still there. It's still there. It just requires us to take up the mantle again. Just return to that. Return to the old ways. And already right there is, pre-built just ready to start up and running again.
I
The
think
network.
I think there are substantial problems in going that route that are probably not insoluble, but need to be addressed because overlooking them guarantees defeat. Not the least of which is, we were talking earlier, probably 20 minutes ago now, the left subverts institutions. So as fast as you can rip them down, the better, right? And make no mistake, the right is not good at this. Otherwise, we wouldn't have an FBI, we wouldn't have an NSA, we wouldn't have a CIA. Chances are good. We might have a CIA, but it wouldn't do what it does now. And so when Rudy talks about we're going to have an institution that goes around and destroys unconstitutional things, this sounds very good, and in one generation will be the worst thing that we have ever seen. Because let's for a moment pretend that somehow this will be set up perfectly, which I find a fallacious premise, but let's pretend that it will. And so for the next 15 years, Justice Thomas is the guy that is guiding the decision about what is or is not constitutional and where this organization should focus its efforts. And there are few justices that I even know of that I think have a better intrinsic understanding of what is constitutional than Thomas. In fact, I don't know that there's necessarily anybody. Okay, who replaces Thomas? And here's how that's going to go. This is someone who is appointed by the President of the United States, because that's what the history of this is. And so the next person will be Sandra Day O'Connor. That is who the next person to guide this institution will be. And these are the people who think Roe versus Wade is great. They think that their living Constitution ideals are the thing that should guide the country. And so you will move very quickly from, maybe these people are going after the ATF because it is inherently unconstitutional. It is a limitation on gun rights in any variety. And specifically after 1987, it's not just a tax anymore. So even according to Supreme Court precedent, it should be gone by now. And maybe this is the wild animal we release that destroys the ATF. And then 5 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, they will be imprisoning governors and state legislatures for having written a law about abortion because Casey versus Planned Parenthood says any undue burden on a woman's right to choose, get an abortion, is an unconstitutional burden, and therefore they will determine that any burden is an undue burden, and that will be the end of the right wing to have governorships, or they will get on board with abortion. And we are really playing with fire with these kinds of things, because if you don't see that this is the risk, right? Then we're going to create this institution. We're going to create the super sovereign constitutional agency of destruction of leftism that within a generation will turn us into the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. What really defines the right? Is basically wanting to have the kinds of checks and balances, if you like, or institutions in place whereby we can ensure that people are trying to attain to the virtues rather than just the entropic nature of society just taking its course.
Yes.
Trying to fight back about swimming upstream in a kind of way. Perhaps it's come to the point, you're right, where we just say, look, we just got to let nature take its course here. It's got to kind of collapse. They've got to, like you said, actually eat themselves.
Yeah.
Whereby they're actually destroying each other in some real economic sense, and it just crumbles. It just crumbles away. And then what will be left? What will be left is the kinds of things that we value, which will rebuild, as it always does. And you're far from the only person who says that. Over at the Warden Post, which is where I'm an editor. I mean, when we have guests on our show, I mean, people far more intelligent, far better read, and more prolific writer than myself, they come to the same conclusion. I hear it all the time. They say that they think where we're headed is a civil war, kind of, or where basically, the left is just going to force everything to crumble. Things have to get a lot worse, basically, before they're going to get better.
It's worth noting that I'm not an accelerationist.
No, and I don't think we should be. I think that would be to betray our principles, really. But I do agree with you. I don't think that there's any harm in trying to realistically ascertain, as you say, we just have no power at all, and therefore what probable outcomes there will be from that. On the other hand, I don't think it makes much sense to not be hopeful. I do think hope is a virtue, and try and look for those opportunities.
Certainly.
Sure.
I mean, I'm imagining that you haven't watched hours and hours and hours of the content here, but there. What was it? A whole bunch of things went wrong right before American Thanksgiving, right? A whole bunch of things. A whole bunch of cases were lost. A bunch of states certified their election. And
yes.
One of those things that if you do what I do, you get is that it comes in really gigantic waves. The right likes to get depressed. And it is a tsunami of depression. It's never just like one guy's having a bad day. It's like the first person shows up wherever it is that you're talking. They're like, man, did you hear like Pennsylvania certified their election? I guess it's like basically over now. And the second guy comes walking and he's like, yeah, it wasn't just them. It was Wisconsin. And the third guy comes in and he says, it's not just that. We just lost all these court cases. So, it's basically over. And so, and we are really good at this. I mean, and don't get me wrong, part of it is these are things that are really happening in life, and addressing things that are negative and really happening is a big deal and something we should do. But the flip side of this is stop getting depressed, right? And so one of the last shows I did before the Thanksgiving break that I took, that I just came off of like now, is stop crying, right? Okay, life sucks. You've got 24 hours in which to wallow in your misery and get back in the game, right? And it has occurred to me numerous times that this is going to have to happen a lot, because we like to get really down on ourselves. And I understand. We've been losing for a long, long time. Sometimes slow, sometimes fast, but we've definitely been losing for a long, long time. And this is sort of the thing that gets me to, we need to treat this like a guerrilla war, because it's not what we do. And we better learn to do it, or we are going to lose, right? And this is why the law is what the law is, right? The proposed law is what the proposed law is. Because if you're a little teeny tiny military, and you go fight the current U.S. military, they're going to roll over you like you're not even there. It is a giant war machine. It is probably the most powerful thing the world has ever seen, and it is unfathomable destruction. But if you plant bombs in roadways, you can keep them tied down for 2 decades in the Middle East with people with nothing more than AK-47s. And so we need to be looking at the political fight like that. We need to be looking at this like some small expenditure on our behalf needs to cost the left, not just instantaneously, not just in a way that they currently feel pain, but they need to be changing their method of doing things based on what we're doing. It's us setting the tempo, not them. And we don't do this, right? We go to the left with compromise, right? Bipartisan legislation and all these kinds of things. And if you do that, then the left always sets the tempo, and they always have, right? They're always nobody on the right is talking about how I don't know, we're going to repeal the 19th Amendment or something, which even then is still letting the left set the tempo, and that's women voting for reference. But even then, the left has set the tempo there, right? But every time that we try, we should have school choice, which is a pro-conservative policy, but the moment that someone brings it up, it's, you're only doing it because you're racist, right? And all of a sudden we're on the back foot again. We're I'm not really racist, and blah, blah, blah. The first right-wing politician I ever see answer, the you're racist charge from the left on school choice with, please explain to me which black people are too stupid to pick their child's school, will be the moment that we set the tempo. Because that will be, I understand you're trying to take the momentum from me here, but you are now on the back foot again. I am setting the tone. You are not going to be the one who runs this discussion. And we're generally very courteous, so that's not what we do. We don't just slam them back in the face. And by the way, this is why the right likes Donald Trump, right? You've called women fat pigs. Only Rosie O'Donnell. And
yeah, he sets the tempo.
Yes,
he sets the tempo. And he's good at it, just through his Twitter account. And again, that's why he's so important. But this is the problem when we say, we on the right do this, we on the right do this. And then you look in the comment sections and it's just black pills. Listen, guys, no black pills. No black pills, even after Donald Trump is back in the White House. Everything's okay. Everything's fine. Just no black pills. Stop doing it. Stop being weak. You can't afford it. I don't mean right now. We can't afford it online. We've got to be supporting the president or whatever. I mean, you just cannot afford it in life. I mean, just man up. I'm sorry. If you need a moment, okay, go like one-on-one with someone, but just stop throwing out these black pills in comment sections. No, you should be banned for doing that. None of this spreading your weakness around. Just stop it. And it's the same weakness you see throughout the Republican Party in the state capitals. So the marches and everything there. Who has been there? Alex Jones and Nick Fuentes. You were there?
Oh yeah.
Good. So okay. So where was where was the GOP? Where are they?
Oh, nowhere.
Were they there? But what about Turning Point USA?
Oh,
where were those guys?
I'm sure they were napping somewhere.
No. So it's just weakness across the board. So the only thing you can do is be as strong and virtuous as you possibly can, and try and spread that. Use the networks. Like I was saying, go to church, go to traditional church. Try and be as influential as you possibly can, wherever you can. According to your ability and your circumstances. This is how this the kind of cultural guerrilla warfare that you're talking about. This is how it's going to take place. So no more black pills, ever. Okay, have a one-on-one. Go and they're there. Have a cuddle with your girlfriend, and she can say some nice things to you. Whatever. I don't know what you need. Okay, but just no black pills in the public discourse. It's not allowed. That's it. But listen, I'm sorry. I have to go. Basically, I'm getting messages from my wife talking about family and what you need, all this kind of stuff. My wife is messaging me.
That's all right.
My children need me. Apparently.
Well then,
imagine that.
Continue to engage in important things in life. I will, before I let you go, say that entire little speech right there. is almost word for word what I'm giving on about a monthly basis at this point. Is
Good.
stop being depressed, get up, get after it, go get some.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
every time that you're depressed and not doing something, the left is winning because they're fighting everywhere,
Yes,
all of the time. So get up and fight them.
absolutely.
That said, there is one super chat before I let you go, which
Okay,
is
go for
Rafael DaCosta for 100 of the currency that I never remember what it is.
it.
Would you say the leftist domain is institution and the right is law? Also, Don, would you do a stream on the laws and executive orders we need to pass? Kind of. To the first question, the
Yeah.
left is very good with institutions, and they have been handing down multi-generational wisdom, at least since Lenin, about how to take over institutions, how to appropriate them for your own use, and what to do with them once you have them. In the world of law, I think we're not as good at law as we should be. We understand what law should be. We're just getting that law created is an institutional process. So we're back in the domain of the left. I don't know. Am I far
Yes,
off there?
exactly. No, no, I completely agree with you. And this is why in my book I wanted to show what Western law actually is and how we got to where we are now. Um, yes, okay, the right is about law and order. Fundamentally, it is, but in the sense that law is about kind of objective Platonic ideas about justice and all sorts of things that we've been talking about in this discussion. And these are things that we are attaining to. It's not just be yourself. No, it's about becoming something ideal. You can imagine, you can perceive in your mind a better self. You can perceive the virtues, the classical virtues of the West. You can perceive those things, and you can. It's a continuous process, but you are constantly becoming those things. And like we said before, it's like you're swimming upstream. Otherwise, the natural course of fallen man is an entropic decline in society. It's degeneration. It is pandering to the lowest common denominator. It is increasingly lower culture rather than higher culture. And, the right is all about whatever needs to be put into place, whatever level of society, to give you skin in the game so you are behaving responsibly and you are lifting yourself ever higher. That's fundamentally what the right is about. So, yes, it's the short answer. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. So, oh man, you are continuously compared to other British people by chat at large. That said, in the world of not spawning multi-hour discussions, because I know I will if I say any of the things that are on my mind right now. Thank you for coming down. I do have some social media of some variety linked down in the description. I get the impression that it is not all of it, but I believe it's everything you gave Sten. So, speaking of which, shout out to Sten for being awesome. But that said, is there anything else that you want to say on your way out?
Buy my book, The Uniqueness of Western Law. Check out the Warden Post, which I'm an editor for. It's a playground of dangerous ideas, we like to call it. You'll see all sorts of weird and wonderful ideas from the right there. It's interesting, and Christ is King. I'm a Christian, and I love that. That's the rhetoric at the moment. All of these rallies going on in America, they're shouting "Christ is King." That's kind of what it's about. It's about there is something above. There is a law and there is a goodness above the elites of this world.
I
So
have to
look to
say,
that.
after years of watching the religious portion of the right in this country get crushed, there is an incredibly heartening moment to see a few hundred people, even if it is just a few hundred people, Jesus is God, Christ is King. Literally any pushback on this secular nonsense of you're not allowed to have morals. So
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more. But with that, I must go. Thank you so much. Maybe we can continue another time.
I'm sure we can.
It was a pleasure.
Remember, everyone, fight the progressives wherever you find them, and fight them like your life depends on it. Because it does.